Okay, welcome back to another week of Tehillim. And today we are embarking, Baruch Hashem, on Sefer Sheni. Remember, we mentioned that the book of Tehillim is broken up into 5 different books, actually. And today, last time we finished the first part of Tehillim. Now we're starting the Sefer Sheni, the second book. And it's no coincidence, of course, as we've seen throughout Tehillim, it always falls in with different things that are going on, either in the calendar or that's going on in the Parshias. And as Rafoyer points out in the beginning of his introduction here, that Tehillim was not only written by Dovid HaMelech. Dovid was the main writer of all the Tehillim, and he's the one that put them all together as well. But there were other people who wrote Tehillim. There were 10 people altogether who wrote them. Adam Arishon, Melchizedek, Avram, Moshe, Haman, not Haman, but someone by the name of Haman, who was related to Shmuel Hanavi, Yedusan, Asaph, and 3 sons of Karach, as we're going to see. And the first book of Tehillim that we just finished, it was all written by Dovid HaMelech, but the second book, which we're beginning today, in Tehillim number Mem Beis 42, the first 8 of these Tehillim are all written by Bnei Karach, by the sons of Karach. Now the sons of Karach were together with their father last week in the Parsha, fighting against Moshe Rabbeinu. The ground comes and it swallows up Karach ve'edasa and all of his men. And the sons of Karach, they were there as well. So Rashi, in the beginning of the Tehillim, tells us what took place. He's quoting Chazal and he explains to us the following. It says, Bnei Karach, where did these sons of Karach come from that they could write Tehillim? They should have been swallowed up. So he says there were 3 sons, Asir, Ve'alkana, Ve'aviasef. Hemayu techila ba'atzis aviyam. In the beginning, they also went along with the plans of their father, Karach. They were going to fight against Moshe Rabbeinu. Ubishasa machloikis pirshu. However, when they saw that the machloikis, that the fighting was getting really bad, they separated themselves from the machloikis. Ukeshenivlu kol siva v'eseh. However, once the earth opened up and swallowed up everything that was in that area, it swallowed up the sons of Karach as well. Upaschar, says Pia, the earth opened up its mouth. Nisha mekayma metoich pi haaretz ki'inyan shenemar u'bnei Karach lo mesu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu opened up like a cleft inside the earth. And on that cleft, the children of Karach, those sons, they fell right onto that piece of the rock. As Chazal tell us, bnei Karach lo mesu, the children of Karach did not die, like everybody else did when they were swallowed up. Visham, and while they were there on that cleft, and they saw their father and everybody else going down, and they realized that they had been saved from total destruction over here, on that exact place, Amru Shira v'sham yizdu ha-mizmorim halalu. They wrote these 8 mizmorim, these 8 Tehillim, while they were standing there and their life was being saved. Va'olu misham, eventually they were able to ascend from this place. And Shasa Aleihem Ruach HaKodesh, and as they emerged from the cleft over here in the rock, in the earth, a great revelation of divine presence of the Shekhinah rested upon them. V'nisnavu ala Golius, and they began to have premonitions and prophecies about the exiles, v'al Chorban, and on the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Habayis v'al Malchus Beis Dovid, and on the kingdom of Dovid HaMelech. So again, as we said, there's no coincidence. We just coming from Parshas Karach, and we saw how terrible Machlekes was, and we see how Karach and all of his Eidasa, all of the people that were together with him, they were destroyed. Nevertheless, the sons that were part of it the entire time, at the end they did tshuva. In the end, they said, we can't be part of this. This is a horrible thing to be chaylik, to argue on Moshe Rabbeinu. And as we mentioned, if you argue on Moshe Rabbeinu, you're arguing on the Rebbeinu Shalom. So they said, we're not going to do it, but they were already there. So they got swallowed up with everybody else. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw their true intentions. He made a little bit of the rock, a cleft, come out, and there they were saved. And while they were there, recognizing the magnitude of the moment, they began singing out praises to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and these 8 Tehillim that we have right now are those praises. Now within that, they had a tremendous Hashras HaShechina. The Shechina was dwelling upon them, they had Ruach HaKodesh, and when they emerged from this cleft, so they began being misnava, they began having prophecy one after the other about the eventual exile of the Jewish people, about the Churban Abayis, the destruction of the temple, and about Malchus Beis Dovid, that King David would end up becoming the king of Klal Yisrael, which answers the question, because we'll see a lot in these verses, especially the way the Mefarshim explain, that the children of Karach are talking about the Beis HaMikdash. We're talking about 1,000 years plus before. How do they know about the Beis HaMikdash? Because they had a nevuah, they had prophecy during this time. So this is these next Tehillim that we're going to learn are all from the children of Karach, the sons of Karach, these 3 sons, and we'll embark right now on the Mefarshim, the way that they begin to explain. So we'll go to Rav Hirsch to begin with, and Rav Hirsch says like this. It says Lam Natsech, and we're beginning 42 Mem Beis, and it says like this: Lam Natseach Maskil Livnei Karach, to him who grants victory and instruction by the sons of Karach. Says Rav Hirsch over here that the sons of Karach, they had this very fervent enthusiasm for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and their devotion to Klal Yisrael's destiny. Therefore, they had the rare ability to compose songs that awaken in Klal Yisrael a recognition of Hashem and inspire love for God. As we're going to see, these are some of the most heart-wrenching pieces of Tehillim, with the words that are going to describe the yearning and the longing of the Yiddish Neshama of that Jewish soul for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why was the children of Karach able to do such a thing? Because look what they did. They got caught up in the machlekes, in the fighting. They were trying to be good sons and follow along with their father. But they realized that that's not what Hashem wants. And at the last minute, they pulled themselves away from the destruction, and they dedicated themselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we know that when Karach was going down, 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 he was saying, Moshe emes v'sairasa emes. Moshe is true, and his Torah is true, and that's what life is really all about. But it was too late for Karach. But the sons of Karach, because of their burning enthusiasm and the desire to actually do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do, therefore they came to a heightened recognition, and they're able to share that with the rest of Klal Yisrael. And therefore he writes, that's the message, or that's the undertones of this Tehillim. And that is that Knesset Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, even though that we are in the Galus, we're in the exile, we still attempt to have this deep yearning for our HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And one of the way in which we kind of subdue this yearning so that it doesn't consume us day and night so that we can function, is that we take a glance back into the past of the Jewish people, and we derive comfort from its firm faith that one day it will come to see that even in the dark gullus that we are in, eventually the gullus itself was here just to serve as an advancement to the ultimate true salvation, which is what? Which is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to bring Mashiach. So we remember that there once was Geula, there was a Geula of Mitzrayim, there was redemption for the Jewish people. We remember that we came into Eretz Yisrael. We remember there was a Beis HaMikdash, the first one, and there was a second one, so we know that it's possible. We know that Klal Yisrael can settle the land. We know that it's possible to have the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael, not in the state of Israel, but in Eretz Yisrael itself, in the land of Israel, and there won't be fighting who should be the MP and who should be the PM and who should be the defense minister and who should be this. All that is going on right now is not the way that Eretz Yisrael is supposed to look. That itself is the greatest sign that not only are the Jews in Galus, in Chutz La'aretz, outside the land of Israel, but if the Jewish people have so much machlokes and so much fighting and so much wildness that is going on inside of Eretz Yisrael, that is the sign that the Galus the exile is there inside the land of Israel as well. And it could even be, as I've heard many times over the years, that the gullus, the exile that exists in Eretz Yisrael, is worse than the gullus that you can find anyplace else. If you would go to the streets of Tel Aviv on a Tuesday night, your hair would probably stand. If you go there on a Friday night, your hair would probably stand on end when you look and you realize everybody here is a Jew. Kate, you go to a club, you go to a bar in America, you walk out on the streets and you see all the crazy people doing crazy things. You think to yourself, okay, no, that's the world. That's the world at large. It's not us. It's not Klal Yisrael. But if you would go to Tel Aviv on an average night of the week, on a Saturday night, where it's Saturday night out on the streets and the bars and the pubs and everything going on over there, you would see what's going on, and you would say, "That's Klal Yisrael. That's the Jewish people. That's how they're behaving. That's the things that they're doing." You would say to yourself, "It's worse. Believe it or not, it's worse." Last night I had to pick up my son from the city. He was in the city for Shabbos. I don't drive through the streets of Los Angeles very often on Motzei Shabbos. By us, Motzei Shabbos is Motzei Shabbos Kodesh. It's after Shabbos, the holy Shabbos. So Saturday night is a holy night. We have to use the night for holiness. In the streets of the city over there, so it's Saturday night, not Kodesh. It's the Saturday night with no holiness at all. And it's spiritually frightening to drive on the streets over there. In Tel Aviv is worse. It's worse, and they're all Yid and they're all Jews. Which means to tell us that the gullus, the exile that we find ourselves in, it's as bad as it is over here, and as far as we are away from Kiddush, and as far as we are from the building the Beis HaMikdash, that's how it feels anyway. Over there in Eretz Yisrael, and again, as you see the government and the fighting that's going on and all of the things that are taking place, that itself is a siman, it's just a sign that Gullus reigns supreme everywhere. But when we look back on our history and we realize that we were once in a terrible Gullus and it was called Mitzrayim, and Hashem took us out of there, and there was once a terrible Gullus which was in Bavel, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of there, and he built a first Beis HaMikdash, and a second one was built afterwards as well. So then we know that the possibility of redemption exists for the Jewish people. We know that the Beis HaMikdash, where everybody will be able to go and convene together as one, convogate, if that's the word. Convogate? No, it's not a word. Congregate. They will be able to congregate as a convocation of Klal Yisrael on the holy days of Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuos once again. We know that it existed. So when we look back and we see what we once upon a time had, it gives us hope, and it gives us the wherewithal to keep trudging through in the gullus and the exile that we find ourselves in, knowing that we're always going to get back. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised us. He promised us that there's going to be another geula. There'll be a geula, a redemption that will be even greater. It will trump all of the redemptions that we had. Mitzrayim will be nothing in comparison to the ultimate geula that we're going to have. Be'ez Hashem b'mheira v'yameinu. Says Rav Hirsch over here that this is a tefillah, this is a tehillim of hope for Klal Yisrael. It's acknowledging the gullus that we are in. It's acknowledging the yearning that we have to get back to Hashem. But it also reminds us of what we once had, and we know that if we had it before, and Hashem promised us that we're going to have it again, we believe amunah shlema that it's going to take place. So he writes over here that b'nei Karach l'meisu, this quote that we quoted in Rashi, the children of Karach did not die. That even though that Karach and all of his followers, they perished over there, however, the sons of Karach, they rose up once more to pay tribute to emes, to truth, and therefore they were saved from destruction. Because they were able to acknowledge at that last moment, no. HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what he's doing. If he put Moshe Rabbeinu in charge as the leader of Klal Yisrael, that's because that's how it's supposed to be. If Aaron HaKohen is supposed to be the high priest, that's how it's supposed to be. If the children of Aaron are supposed to follow their father, that's how it's supposed to be. Our father Korach has some serious gaiva issues, haughtiness and arrogance, and he's taken that gaiva to the next level over here, and he started the machlekes with the greatest man of all time. We're not going to fall for that. We're going to defend the emes, the truth, and the truth is we believe in a Rabbi Shalom who runs the world, and we will accept the way that Hashem runs the world because that's what Klal Yisrael needs to be able to achieve completion and success. And therefore he writes, that's why they were saved over here. And the miracle of their deliverance seemed to awaken inside of them this divine inspiration, which would end up which was a mark to their descendants for the centuries to come. Which means that as long as a Yid is pursuing the truth, as long as a Jew, no matter what the situation is in, can always look beyond the darkness of the gullus, of the exile that they are going through, and see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a plan and He's running the world perfectly with precision. So then, wherever a Jew will find themselves, it could be in Tel Aviv, it could be in Tarzana, California, or anywhere in between those two places, they will be worthy and they will be zeicha of having this divine inspiration, of feeling that spark of the kedusha that resonates inside of us, and they will come in contact with the yearning, as we're going to describe in this Tehillim, the yearning of the Neshama to get closer and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's interesting to note over here that Rav Hirsch says that you see that from the man who picked the biggest fight with Moshe Rabbeinu in the entire Torah, his children went on to become the songwriters of some of the most heartfelt Tehillims that we have, which express the glory and the beauty and the loftiness of the Yiddish Neshama. And not only is it the children of Karach that do that, but he brings down from the Gemara, tells us that there were quite a few descendants of the enemies of Klal Yisrael who ended up becoming, either they were Megai or they converted, and they became defenders of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His Torah. For example, we find that the descendants of Haman, they were amongst the greatest teachers in Bnei Brak. And some of the offspring of Sisra, who was an enemy of Klal Yisrael, they became instructors of the young children in Yerushalayim. And then you had Shemaiah and Avtalyon. They were from the seat of Sancheiriv, and they also publicly taught over Torah to Klal Yisrael. So he says, Rav Hirsch, the message is, and I think perhaps this is what he's coming to tell us, is that in Gullus, it often looks like it's dark. It often looks hopeless. Jewish people already 2,000 years were struggling already with this exile. Nobody has any idea when it's going to end. And you never know where that ending is going to be, and it's hard sometimes to even see the light in the gullus. Nevertheless, just as the enemies of the Torah, the enemies of Moshe Rabbeinu, the enemies of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, these enemies, they came full force to fight against us. At the end, and it looks dark and foreboding, and we look like we're in trouble. At the end of the day, the descendants of those enemies become some of the greatest supporters of Hashem and His Torah. Which means that in the darkness, even in the fighting that we have to go through, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, He's just preparing. He's preparing the Geula, the redemption for us. And therefore, even in the gullus, in the exile that we are going to go through, that we are going to be confounded by on a regular basis, we have to believe, as Rav Hirsch points out, we have to believe and have the faith that it's all for a reason, and it's all just preparing the ultimate Geula, the ultimate redemption that we are going to be privy to have. So the Mefarshim say like this. In the pasuk says, "Ka'ayel beis, ka'ayel ta'areg alafike mayim." Say the children of Karach, I am like a deer, like a young hart, alafike mayim, on the springs of the water. Ke nafshi sa'areg elech Elokim. So too my nephesh is sa'areg. It thirsts. Elecha, for you, Elokim, for you, my God. Like the young hart, the young deer, is yearning for the water on the afike mayim, on the springs of water, so too my nephesh, my soul, is yearning for you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Malbim over here. Ha'ayel hu tzamo l'mayim, an ayel, a heart, a ram. He thirsts, he yearns for water, mitzad tivoi, because his nature is to be thirsty. V'milvad ze oichel shorashim aresim umevakshim lechabos ha'odem ha'eres b'mayim. So too, when this heart, this ram, is out there in the forest, and it's hungry, it starts eating shrubbery from the ground. It often ends up eating poisonous type of shrubbery, and therefore its burning sensations are going on inside of it, and it needs to drink to quench the burning that's going on. Says the Malbim, there are two reasons why a heart, why a ram over here is hungry. Number one, it's the teva, the nature of a ram, is to be hungry, is to be thirsty. And they're in a desolate area where there's not much water, and so therefore the thirst is always there. And number two, they do things to themselves to make the thirst come even more. They eat the wrong things. For these two reasons, this heart, this ram, this deer, whatever we'll translate it as, is on the edge of the waters looking to drink. It has a thirst for water. So too my nephesh, my soul, thirsts for you, Hashem. El gilui ashchina v'anavua v'ruach hakodesh k'moi b'yimei kedem. My soul is thirsting for you, Hashem, for the revelation of the Shechina, for the Nevuah, for the prophecy, and the Ruach HaKodesh, the divine inspiration that existed once a time before. Meaning the nephesh, the neshama of a Jew, knows what once upon a time existed in this world. It knows that there was Kiddush, it knows that there was Nevuah, it knows that there was a closeness to Hashem. And therefore the neshama, which is so bottled up in Gullus, and it's so squelched with being able to get close to Hashem the way that it wants to, a person should know that deep inside the recesses of the neshama is this tremendous yearning and thirsting that they have. Says Metzudas Dovid, an ayil, if we would be in the forest, if we would be in the desolate areas, you would hear the ayil, you would hear the ram, tzoekes, screaming and crying for water. Lirvas atziman, because it never has enough water to satisfy itself. Nafshi, if we could only hear the voice of our nephesh, of our soul, we would hear our soul saying the same thing. It would hear our nephesh, our neshama crying out in hunger pangs and thirst to get closer and closer to Hashem. And we can never, Va'nefesh lo simale, says King Solomon, the soul is never satisfied completely. If we would just hear the voice, we would understand how much it's yearning for these things. Next pasuk. So let me just read you Rav Hirsch over here. Rav Hirsch writes that this idea that you have this deer that is yearning for the water, he says the deer gets faint with thirst, and it stands in a very deep place in the desert, and it can hear the springs of water roaring forth from the rocky heights above. But it can't go up. It's so weak at this point. It's so thirsty. It doesn't have the energy. It can't go up. But it knows that there's a spring of water above it, but it just can't reach the drink that it thirsts for. Says Rav Hirsch, the same is true of Klal Yisrael, because we've been brought very low in suffering, in the exile, in the Gullus. However, Yisrael knows full well that there's a God above, and it knows that God is near, and yet it feels as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very far away. And we lack the strength to soar up to Him and to win His nearness. But we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there. Just like the aisle knows that the water is there, but it's hard for him to get there. So it's yearning more and more and more and more and more. When you hear, it's like when you're in the restaurant, or when you get to the restaurant, so you're hungry. When you get in and you smell the food, you're even hungrier. When you make the order, you start anticipating what the food is going to taste like. And then you're waiting and you're waiting. I don't know what happened in all the restaurants, but since COVID, they don't know how to serve food on time anymore. You go to the average restaurant these days, you're like, but there's nobody else here. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting. They forgot how to cook in the kitchen. The longer you have to wait, but you know that it's coming, the hungrier and hungrier the pangs get inside of you. Says Rav Hirsch that Klal Yisrael is like this ayah, or like this heart. We hear the waters of Geula, we can hear the resonation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, we can sense it in our Neshama, and it's getting closer and closer as we get closer towards the end of days. So that means that the Geula is more imminent. And yet we're so crushed by the Gullus, we're so crushed by all of the pressures and everything that we have to go through. It's very hard to get up there. It's hard to muster the strength. But we know that it's there. It's just that we know that it's there. We can express, says Rav Hirsch, we can express over here the heartfelt yearning of, just like the ayil who wants the water, so to the nephesh. If we would just hear the cries that are there, we would realize how badly we want it to be. Says the Malbim in the next pasuk. Tzama nafshi lelokim. So he reiterates himself. My soul is thirsting for Elokim, for Hashem. Lekel chai, for the living God. Masai avoy ve'era'eh penei Elokim. When will I come and be able to see the face of Hashem? Just like the heart has this burning, this thirst inside of him, and he's waiting, when will I be able to get to the water to be able to lap it up and drink and satisfy my thirst? So the nephesh is wondering, when will I finally be able to come in contact with the Kel Chai, with the living God? When will I come to see the face of Hashem? Says the Malbim Mevara ki ashtoikekus hazeh, hu gam ke mitzad shnei devarim. This tshuka, this burning desire that the neshama has to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is for two reasons. Remember, we said by the ayil, we said by the heart, there's two reasons why it's thirsty. Number one, naturally, if you're in a dried out desert, you need water, you have to drink. Number two, we said that it eats the wrong things that create even more hunger, or more thirst inside of it. Says the Malbim, it's the same thing with the nephesh. Echad, number one, tivi kemoshi yitzma ha'ayil mitzad tiva shel hamayim kei nafshi. Number one, the neshama, the nephesh that a person has, by its very definition, thirsts for Hashem. The neshama thirsts to be close to Hashem. That's all that it wants. It doesn't thirst for the world. It doesn't thirst for prestige. It's not looking for honor and for glory. The neshama, the nephesh, doesn't care about that at all. All it cares about is that my nephesh, my neshama, my essence, the ruchnius of who I am, it wants to come in contact with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's teva. That's the nature of the soul. So a person that is not trying to get close to Hashem, a person that doesn't care about living a life where the Ribbono Shel Olam and His Torah are something that I am striving for, that means that they're going against their teva. They're going against their nature, which is why when you work with people that are becoming Bali Tshuva and the light switch turns on in their head, it's just their nature of who they are. It's just expressing itself, maybe for the first time in their life, whether when they're 18, 25, 35, 45, 60, 70, 80 years down the road. But the nature that they fought for all of these years, suddenly it's coming into reality. Says the Malbim further, Mitzad Teva Tzamal Elokim. So on one hand, the nature of the person is, I'm thirsty for Hashem. Hashem quenches our thirst. And then the nephesh is thirsty, and there's only one drink that's going to satisfy our thirst. And that's when we can lap up the Ribbono Shel Olam, we can bring in the Kedusha of the Shechina. Mitzachu kel chai, because he's the living God. Shebo toli chiyus hanefesh ruchniyoseha, because the life force of our nephesh and the life force of our ruchnius, of our spirituality, depends upon the kel chai, the living God. And therefore, the nephesh naturally desires HaKadosh Baruch Hu in its life. Naturally desires to do those things that they're going to bring it closer to Hashem. Because my nephesh, without HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's like dormant, it's dead. My nephesh, or my ruchnius, without Hashem in the picture, it's dead. Anyone who thinks that they're spiritual without HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making a very grave error in their lives. You cannot be spiritual without Hashem. There is no such thing. Your spirit is your neshama. Your neshama gets its life force from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you want to be ruchnius without HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That doesn't exist. Kamosha Kosev, like it says in the pasuk, V'atem hadevekim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayoim. It says later on in the Torah, we'll get there in several months, and that is that you are all dovik, you are cleaving to Hashem, Elokeichem chayim, the living God, and He makes you live today as well. Now that's one thing. That's the natural desire that a person has. That's why we say, when will I come to see you, Hashem? Like in the earlier days. So that he says, Zais Shenisi, Simon Mikri Kamoi, Ha'ayel She Yisaysef by Simon Ide Machal Shoicha Shavashim Arasim Kenanochi. He says, remember, the ayil in the desert has another reason why it gets thirsty, and that's because it eats the wrong things. It eats the grass, it eats the poisonous things, and therefore it's making his thirst. He's making his thirst even more. Says the Malbim, in a similar way, it's not poison, Baruch Hashem, but in a similar way, when Klal Yisrael is reminded of that which we once had in our lives, when we are reminded of the way in which our nephesh felt when we were standing in the Beis HaMikdash, when we could recall the days of yore, when we were standing and watching the Kahanim do all of their Avodah, and we knew that on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol would go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he's going to grant atonement for all of Klal Yisrael. When we would be there for a Sukkot and we would see the Simcha, the marvel of everybody dancing together in the Simcha's Beis HaShoeva, and the Neshama, like the Gemara says, anyone who never saw that, they never saw joy in their entire life. We know our Neshama knows what joy really is all about. Says the Malbim, that itself contributes to the second level of thirst that our nephesh has. On one hand, it's natural that a person is thirsty for Hashem. On the other hand, when we remind ourselves of what it is that we did have, what we once were privy to, so it just increases the desires that we have to get closer and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Metzudas Dovid on this, Tzoma nafshi, what does it mean that my nephesh thirsts? Mis'ava ani lebeis Elokim, I have a taiva, a desire for the house of Hashem, the Beis HaMikdash, Ketsama mis'ave lemayim, like somebody who's thirsty, they have a strong taiva, a desire for water. Ve'eshon, and I ask, Masai avo lirois pnei Hashem bebeis hamikdash, and that's what I'm asking. When will I be zeichet to see the Shechina in the Beis Hamikdash, in the holy temple there in Yerushalayim? So says the Metzudas Dovid, and the Malbim is learning this way as well, and that is that the Neshama has taivas, has real strong desires and thirst to bring itself back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A person who doesn't feel that, you don't walk around on a daily feeling this yearning to get close to Hashem, that just means that we are very disconnected from our neshamas. Teva, remember, the nature is that you want to be close to Hashem. The soul is thirsting, it's crying out like that ayil. We should probably take a field trip once to a desert and we should just hear the cries of the deer in the desert who are thirsty. And if you'd hear those cries, And then you would know that the cries that our neshamas are eliciting every single moment is much deeper and much greater and much more painful than that. Because it knows that in the gullus, in the exile, we don't have what's natural. It's unnatural to live in America. It is unnatural to be at the beck and call of all of the gashmis of Los Angeles and Hollywood and all these. It's not natural for the neshama. It's against our teva. Maybe by the body, that's the nature of the body. The body loves all this stuff. The physical nephesh habahamis, the animalistic soul that a person has, it gets great geschmack out of this world. That's true. But the neshama, which is the ikar of who we really are, it despises all this. It wants nothing at all. And on the other hand, the nature is, I want to get closer to Hashem. So if we're not feeling that, that means we have to work on connecting with our nephesh. Says Rav Hirsch over here, Klal Yisrael's soul is thirsting for Hashem, and it's thirsting for the living God, as opposed to the dead idols of the nations that surround it. Yeah, the whole world is just reruns. That's all that this world is. It's just showing the same thing over and over and over and over again. There's ein chadash tachas Hashem. There's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing that the world is offering us today that they didn't try to offer our ancestors 1,000 years ago. Now, if you ask the average person, well, look how advanced we are. Technology is so advanced. The cars are greater. The phones are greater. Our travel is great. Everything is advanced. That's all physical. There's physical advancement in the world because man is obsessed with his body. He's obsessed with his physical desires. He's obsessed with making his world more comfortable and easier and more luxurious for himself. But the neshama, the nephesh, the soul that's inside, that is regressing in the world because we are cut off from understanding what a neshama really wants. So he says that while we're here amongst the nations of the world, we live in America, which nobody has to be a genius to see what's going on in America today. Is literally falling apart at the seams over here. The morality is just dipping farther and farther and farther down. Rabbi Block was just here for Shabbos, and he spoke by Shalosh Shudas yesterday, and he said a beautiful idea from Rabbi Avigdor Miller. Rabbi Avigdor Miller said that when he would vote for a candidate, seemingly presidency, whatever, he didn't make Israel the main point. That was not the main issue, which you'll see how different things have become right now. It's not the main issue. He said, why? Because Eretz Yisrael is in the hands of Hashem. The land of Israel has existed for thousands of years miraculously, and it will continue to exist miraculously forever. Whether the president loves the land of Israel, it doesn't matter. It might look like on the surface he's good for Israel, but it doesn't matter. Why? Because Eretz Yisrael is God's country. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take care of it in miraculous ways. So how do I vote for a candidate? I go based on the moral content of this candidate. Is his morality something that is in line with our morality? Or is his morality something that is so immoral, there's no way I could vote for such a person? And if you look at the biography of Rabbi Avigdor Miller, you'll see that he went on campaigns against some of the people that were running for offices because he felt that they represented such immorality. If they would become the leaders, then it would just be the demise of New York or the demise of America. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that the people that are leading the country and the voices that we keep hearing in the news over and over and over and over again are the voices of immorality and the voices of the darkness of the physicality and of this world and of gaiva and of taiva and all of the bad things in between. Says Rav Hirsch, even when we're in Gullus and even when we're here, our nephesh doesn't desire any of that. It doesn't want all of the reruns of this world. It doesn't want all of the luxuries. It doesn't care about this. Rather, Klal Yisrael is yearning for the day then when it's going to be permitted to come home once again and to see itself standing before the Pnei Elokim, before the face of God. That's what we want. That's what the Neshama is dreaming of all day long. It cannot wait until it comes back to the Beis HaMikdash, when we'll be able to sense once more that Hashem is not far away, but is near in loving concern. And then Yisrael will know that in all of its totality, it's standing before the face of Hashem. That's what we want. That's what we yearn for. We're not looking for other things. Rav Aaron Leib Steinman, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he was a man that was completely cut off from the physical world, completely cut off. He barely ate, he barely drank, he barely slept, he barely did anything. And they lived in an apartment in Bnei Brak, he and his wife, for many, 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 many years. And they never updated the apartment. You know, when everybody else was painting and getting new furniture and making a new kitchen here and there, they never did anything. They left everything the way that it was. So his wife, after, I don't remember, it was 40 years living in the apartment, so she thought maybe they should paint the walls. Well, 40 years is a long time to go without painting the walls of your apartment. And his apartment, by the way, was a public thoroughfare. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of people that were coming into that apartment every single day. He had a minyan in his apartment. He gave shiurim in his apartment. People, dignitaries would come and meet with him. People came for brachas. I was in that apartment several times. It was a busy place. So she said to her husband, no, I've iron laid, maybe 40 years, maybe paint the walls. He said, do we need to? He said, if you feel that we need to, go ahead and paint the walls. But do we need to? We lived all these years with the walls are just fine, aren't they? Do we need to? So I said, okay, we don't need to. There ended up being, shortly after that, a pipe broke in the wall, and it ended up damaging the walls. And she came to her husband and she said, well, guess we don't have a choice now. You know, the pipe broke, there's water and everything. Maybe we have to paint the walls. So I said, do we need to? If you feel that we need to, my dear wife, I'm not going to stop you. Go and paint the walls. But do we need to? And so they patched up the wall. I don't remember exactly all the details of the story, but in the end they did not paint the house. Because they felt, we need to. We're yearning for Beis HaMikdash, we're yearning for closer to Hashem, we're yearning for Ruchnias, they're painting a wall in a small apartment in Bnei Brak. It's not Kashmirs. But on their level they felt, it's too much. Rabbi Kanievsky, famous story, Rabbi Kanievsky had an old oven in her apartment. And her children for years tried to get their mother to upgrade to a new oven. And they used to tell her, Ima, you need a new oven. This oven is archaic. It doesn't even work so well. You need a new oven. She said, no. It works, cooks the food. Your father is happy with the chicken. I don't need a new oven. So one day, their mother, she'd gone out of town for, I remember, a chassan or something. She traveled away from Bnei Brak. And they came to the kitchen and they said, this is our chance. Ima is gone. The oven is so old, it's breaking down. It's not working the way that it used to. They call the appliance store and they say, come, take away the oven and bring a new oven. So my mother, when she comes home, she'll be surprised. She comes home and she was very surprised. And she calls her children and she says, what did you do to my oven? They said, Ima, the oven is so old, it doesn't work. She said, I want my old oven back right now because it still works. And she would not take no for an answer, and they had to switch back the new oven for the old oven, and that is how she survived. An oven in Bnei Brak does not look like an oven that you will get not even from Sears in California. An oven that they would get, this little tiny oven over there that, I don't know, maybe you have to ignite the flame. I don't remember exactly how everything works. Believe me, it's not overindulgence. And yet she said, we're not here for this world. We're here for that world. You know, they never had a telephone. The Kanievskis don't have a telephone in their house. Why did they not get a telephone? Because they said the following. If we get a telephone, everybody will think they have to have a telephone. What if there's people who don't want to get telephones? Well, if they see us get a telephone, then they're going to get a telephone. Maybe you don't need one. We'll survive. Somehow, in the new age world that we live in, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, who is one of the busiest men in the entire universe, he has survived 92 years bli ayin hara, and he should go to Me'eh Ve'esrim without a telephone. How did he do it? No one's ever even seen pictures of him on a telephone. He doesn't talk on the phone. There's like one famous picture. A certain yeshiva needed a major donation, and he said, you have to speak to this particular gevir over there in America. He's the only one that will be able to help. And the person didn't want to call, so Rav Chaim Kanievsky said, okay, I'll make the call. And so there's one picture of Rav Chaim Kanievsky on a cell phone, a flip-up phone, by the way, not a smartphone, a flip-up phone, making the call to the gevir, and the gevir said, okay, Reb Chaim, whatever you say, and he writes the check. That's about it. One picture, 92 years. You'll find them on a telephone. Says Rav Hirsch, the yearning that's inside the neshama of Klal Yisrael is a yearning for ruchnius. It's a yearning to be standing in the presence of Hashem. It's a yearning that there should be a geula, redemption. It's that crying out of the neshama that's inside, that's mishtaikik, that desires close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Doesn't desire the things of this world, doesn't care about the things of this world. And yet, if a person ends up overindulging in this world, that means that you are denying your nature. The nature of the soul is, I only crave one thing, to be close to Hashem. I am filling up my life with so many other things, so you just cut off from your soul. There's no soul. It's a body, it's skin, it's bones, it's flesh, it's hair. That's what you are. But a neshama, that already a person unfortunately has been cut off from. And therefore, these Meforshim are saying over here that Klal Yisrael never loses hope in the Gullus, even though we're enshrouded in darkness. It's all around us, everywhere that we go. Especially you live in Los Angeles and places like this. It's everywhere. I was with somebody in a phone store. They wanted to get a smartphone. So the guy is trying to convince us that you have to have the new iPhone. Why do you need the new iPhone? Because you can tell Siri anything that you want, and she'll take care of it for you. So I was not impressed. He said, come on, I'm going to show you. So he's like, hey Siri, call, I don't know, Rachel, whatever it is, call Rachel. So he's looking at the phone. Siri, I said, call Rachel. Siri, call Rachel. It's not working. He's like, well, it just usually works. Yeah, that's the world that we live in. People are talking into phones. They're asking their phone. Anybody has a question, where do they go to get the answer? You just ask Siri, she'll tell you the answer to everything. She'll answer all of the questions of the meaning of life. It's all in Siri. Is that? No, it's not true. There's not the meaning of life. The meaning of life is in the nephesh, is in the neshama, is in our kesher with the Rabbi Neshama. And therefore, says Rav Hirsch, that Klal Yisrael stands in Gullus. They stand surrounded by the idols and the sham of this world, and yet the heart and the mind is thinking of one thing. What is that? I want to return myself to the Rabbi Neshama. I want to be able to stand in the Pnei Elokim. Next verse over here, Dalet. Haiseli dimasi lechem yoimam v'layla. My tears were bread to me, my sustenance day and night. Be'emo elai kol hayom hayeh elokecha. As the goyim that were around me were saying all day long, where is your God? So what does this mean over here? That the tears of Dovid HaMelech, or the children of Karach over here, that their tears are their lechem, are their bread. So Rav Hirsch writes that the yearning that Klal Yisrael has for Hashem is so great, has no desire for any other nourishment in this world, rather than just to be close to Hashem. And therefore the tears that we cry for the gullus to end, for the closest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come, becomes our bread, and the tears never cease flowing out of our eyes because we're constantly under the ridicule of the nation who are teasing us and making fun of us and saying, oh really, you're the chosen nation? Are you really the chosen nation? So then how come you're in gullus? How come you're in exile? Are you really the chosen nation? So how come the anti-Semitism is on the rise? Are you really chosen? So how come of the only nation in the world that cannot make a government is Israel? Tell me that. How come if you're so smart and you're so wise and you're God's people, why do you fight and bicker with each other day and night and not stop? How is that supposed to be? Says Rav Hirsch, so those tears of the yearning for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that becomes our bread, that becomes our sustenance. Says Rashi, Mikan she'atzara misaveas es ha'adam ve'enu mevakesh le'echol. Says Rashi, an amazing thing. The tsaros that a person will go through, the difficulties, the tsara, the pain that a person is in, it satisfies the hunger inside of the person. And they don't ask to eat anything else. Like it says, I cried, Shmuel Hanavi says, I cried, Bechana. It says by Chana, she cried, I cried and I cried and I cried. I want nothing else to eat. So the tears that a Jew in exile sheds is our sustenance. It's the Hazarim Bedima Berina Yiktzaru. It's when a person plows or plants, he plants the field with rina, with tears. So when he will come to harvest, it will be berina, will be with song. That means that a person has to know that when you let out the krechs, when you let out the cry, when you're saying Tehillim privately to yourself, or when you're lighting the candles Friday night, and you're suddenly overwhelmed with this feeling of kedusha, and the tears just start flowing naturally out of your eyes. That's the sustenance, that's the water that this nephesh, that this soul is looking for and searching for. We might not make it back to the Beis Hamikdash. We might not get the waters of the Shechina flowing down so easily in the darkness of our exile. Nevertheless, the tears, which is liquid, which is this watery substance that will come down, that itself will give us. It will give us the sustenance, like lechem, like bread. That's what we'll live in. Says the Radak, Begolis yomer lihayeh lokecha. While we exist in Golis, the nations say, where's your God? And if He is the God of truth, and you serve God, He should be saving you. And He should remove you from Golis, from the exile. And He's not. He doesn't listen to you. He doesn't bring you salvation. Klal Yisrael is getting worse. Every generation it's getting more and more difficult for us to survive. So therefore that itself, the fact that the world laughs at us and scoffs at us, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has not yet seen fit to reveal Himself in the way that He could, that also, says the Radak and others, that also is a cause for our tears. But our tears are something that is healthy, says Rav Hirsch, because the tears become our lechem, they become our bread, our sustenance. And we'll conclude with one more verse, number 5. Eila eskara, I remember these, I remember what it used to be like. V'yeshbecha alai nafshi, and I will pour out my soul. Ki ever basach adadem ad beis Elokim, and I'll pour out my soul. I'll break through the barriers over here that are leading me up to the steps of the house of God, b'kol rina, with a voice of rina, of song, v'toida, and gratitude, hama and chaygeg, when everybody is gathering together for the holiday over here. Says Rav Hirsch on these words, even while all the nations are laughing at me, and they see Klal Yisrael, I mean, it's ridiculous. We claim that the Rabbi is, the Temple Mount belongs to us. We claim that that's the place where the Beis Hamikdash stood. And who's on there? Arabs that hate us, they want to destroy us, they make riots, they make our lives miserable. So here we are claiming for 2,000 years that belongs to us. We're going to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash over there, that's where we belong. And yet we find that the world is laughing at us because we don't have, not only do we not have it, the enemies who are against us, they're the ones. And then we have fights, we have wars, we have missiles flying overhead, and we are the ones that get punished by the world. We are the ones that are called war criminals. We are the ones that are not allowed to defend ourselves. Is there ever a nation in the world who warns their enemy so far in advance, get out of that building because we're about to blow it up? Did you ever hear of such a nation? Nobody does such a thing in war, and yet we're ridiculed. However, I take comfort, he writes, in recalling the past glories that Klal Yisrael had. And even though these memories bring me much pain, it's painful to think what it used to be like. It's painful to think of Kohanim and Leviim singing their song and the Beis HaMikdash standing in the right way and the Shekhinah coming down. On one hand, it's painful. On the other hand, it's redeeming because I realize that we got out of all of the gullahs before. There was a geula, there was a redemption. We're going to remove ourselves. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to remove us from that again as well. So this whole Tehillim, as we'll see, and again, as we, not just a coincidence that it's right after Parshas Karach, but we're also heading in the month of Tammuz to the 3 weeks, which is the time that we always feel the loss of the Beis HaMikdash. And you can't really feel the loss of something unless you know what it is that you lost. So these Tehillim over here are informing us of what the Neshama should really be thinking about during this time. And that is that the nature of the soul is to be thirsty for Hashem. When there was a Beis HaMikdash, anybody could walk in any time of the day and they could satisfy that thirst. The Shekhinah was there, there were miracles that were there were nigunim, there were songs that would touch every chord in your heart and your soul. There were karbanos that you could bring to rectify the mistakes that we made. There was the gathering of all of Klal Yisrael together during the Chagim, the festivals. It was a miraculous place. And in a miraculous place, the Neshama, which itself is a miracle in this world, was able to thrive. So as we head towards the Yud Zayin Tammuz, we head towards the 17th of Tammuz, which takes us into the 3 weeks. We have to know that in this world that we're in, so we're cut off from our very nature. And part of what we're yearning for with the Beis HaMikdash to be rebuilt is that things should go back to normal. Normal is when you hear the cries of the Neshama yearning for Hashem, and you can satisfy it with everything that the Beis HaMikdash and the Shekhinah offers to our soul. Okay, we'll hold it over here today. So we'll start next week, Be'ez Hashem, in the 6th verse, and I think we'll probably finish this Membeis next week. Be'ez Hashem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.